Hi, I'm GingerGerald, and I'm here, as you can see, with
I'm
Caroline.
Offthegridneedlearts.
And I will have that all linked below on my channel. And as you can see, I'm knitting right now because we're having a little office hours with the teacher. So
I'm knitting too. I'm working on a sock at the moment. So, want to see?
oh, yes. And what's the color?
Well, it's hard to describe. This is a one-of-a-kind skein that my friend Adrienne dyed.
So old oak yarns. I'll link that below too.
And it's not showing up properly in the camera, but it's got pinks and yellows and teals and purples.
Cool.
All different kinds. But you can see that it looks, when it's knit up, looks a bit different.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I want to like learn about, because it's hard to look at a skein of yarn and know how it's going to knit up. And I'm sure that just takes practice.
Well, yeah, and sometimes it's still a surprise.
So
sometimes it's still a surprise. So that's okay. You know, when you're buying the yarn in the ball that it's already, ready to go, you pretty much know what you're going to get. Like that black yarn that you're working with.
Yeah, because
right.
It's just black with specks of color.
That's right. So before I have some questions from some people who left me comments. So I was going to answer those today. But before I do that, did you have any questions for me that I can answer?
Yes. So I have been knitting, practicing. Obviously, I'm starting over again because I had a big mistake last night. But my as I'm knitting down the row, like, because I have 20 stitches on this needle right now.
Yep.
As people can see, I've switched back to my wood needles, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But my stitches keep getting caught on the hinge here between the wood and the metal.
Yep.
So is that a tension issue, or is that?
It could be a number of things. It could just be the join of the needle to the rest of the cable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be just because as your stitches that you've completed have gone onto the cable, the rest of your other stitches are, a little bit tighter. So as you pull the yarn and you knit new stitches, I'm not wording this well. In a nutshell, it's fine. Totally
okay.
normal.
So just push it up over and up.
Push it up over around.
Because I don't think my tension is an issue, because I can get my needles, and these are fairly dull needles, I think, compared to looking at your needles.
Well, these are a lot smaller. And actually, the name of these needles, they're called Haya Sharps.
I knew that's what you were going to say.
Yeah.
Because I keep listening to podcasts. That's what I hear all the time. Haya Sharps, and they're so sharp. And
they are sharp, but I can still use my finger
to push it off.
To push my stitches off.
Which I do the same thing as what Caroline said in her video, in the purling video yesterday. And actually, I do with both hands. I push under, and then as I'm trying to push this other stitch off, I'm actually using my finger.
Oh, okay.
To guide the.
That was Myra that asked that question. I thought that was a good one because it was so funny to me for something that I had never noticed that I did.
Yeah.
But it's true. So.
And it does hurt. I don't want to say it hurts my hand, but like my fingers in those areas get sore, and I think it's just because I'm a new knitter. So as I progress, I'm sure the pain tolerance will go down.
Knitter's calluses, right?
Yeah.
Probably why I don't notice it.
But it's funny because when I go from knitting to stitching, then I pick up like my 28s or 26 needles, and I feel like I'm stitching on this little splinter. Compared to these wood needles. So.
I know. Well, I do a lot of knitting on smaller needles. And so when I use a 4.5 or a 5mm needle, that feels really big.
Yeah.
So we call them broomsticks. And Louise laughs because she said, yeah, those aren't broomsticks. Because
you use much bigger.
Really big needles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Did I? I don't remember. We kind of talked a little bit before we started the video. No, I don't think so. Not at this moment. If I have a question as you're answering your questions, maybe it'll help jog my memory.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, Cheryl Bell asked, when I purl, I'm dropping the needle in my right hand so I can wrap the thread around the needle. I'm using straight needles, not with a cable yet. Is this normal? I'm trying to keep the yarn threaded through my fingers for tension. So that's a good question. So I'm going to switch over to this one because I have to do it in order to see what I do. Because I think I do drop it off slightly, my hand, when I purl. So when I wrap the yarn, let's see, the needle's in, and then yeah, I do. Look at, my hand is off.
Mm-hmm. I even do that with the regular.
I'm holding both needles in my left hand.
I was just going to say, I'm doing knit stitch right now, and I do the same thing.
Yeah, so I do that. I do that, Cheryl. And so what you want to do is you just want to make sure that your left hand has got both needles trapped. I've got 3 fingers holding the top 2 tips together, and then just wrap and off. So put the needle in, I'm still holding the needle. And as I wrap, I kind of still maybe sometimes hold it with my thumb, but no, mostly I don't. My hand is letting go and wrapping the yarn, but I am holding them together with my left hand. Good question. Another thing that I never noticed I did.
Okay. You're so used to it.
So did I, sorry? Yeah, it's
so used to it.
It's true. Did I answer that one thoroughly enough?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
If not, re-ask the question or, specify.
Good plan. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Myra actually asked another question about the pattern for the dishcloth. So I'm going to get to that in a minute because that's going to be a whole conversation. Okay, so Andrea Strom asked, for some reason the whole row I can knit and purl just fine, but the last stitch I do is always like stretched out and loose. I don't know why, and I'm not sure how to make that more in line with the rest. Now, you and I had the same conversation.
And I have the same issue.
The last stitch being loose.
Yes.
And the short answer is that that is totally normal. The last stitch is generally going to be a little bit loose. Now, the practice yarn that I'm using a bulky yarn on a smaller needle. And so that's creating a fabric that's really quite dense. And what happens is on my last stitch, because the fabric is so dense, that last stitch isn't as loose as it should be if I were knitting on the proper size needles for this yarn. I wouldn't want to produce a garment made out of the fabric that I'm producing on these needles because it's too stiff. It's a little bit too stiff, but I'm a really loose knitter. And we're going to learn all about gauge and gauge swatches later on down the line. But basically, in a nutshell, for now, don't worry about that loose stitch that happens at the end. When you turn around and you go back the other way on the next row, generally that loose stitch kind of snugs itself up into the new row, and you can't really tell. Just as you knit the new row, snug that yarn up nice and firmly as you take that first stitch. Now, there's another trick that we can do at the beginning of each new row that we start. I didn't get into this yet because we were just really learning how to make the stitches. And so I was kind of waiting until we actually had a pattern to work on, and then I was going to show you how to do it. But the problem is the next 2 things that we're working on, dishcloth and then the hat, which is knit in the round, neither of those projects will lend itself to this trick. We actually won't be using it. So I'll just tell you now. in a nutshell, if you're knitting something flat, and I know the dishcloth is going to be flat, but we're actually going to be knitting the dishcloth in a diamond, and the edges we are increasing and decreasing at the beginning and the end of each row. So this trick will not apply. And it's not a trick, it's a technique. If you're knitting something like a rectangle, like a scarf, your first stitch of every row, you would simply slip it off the needle without knitting it. You look like you're counting and concentrating.
Nope, I'm switching to
Did you hear what I said, Gerald? Were you listening? Were you paying attention?
Yes, you said I look like I'm counting.
What was I talking about before that? You're not paying attention.
About slipping the first stitch off of every row.
You're going to get sent to the corner
listening.
in a minute. All right. Okay, so you're going to slip the first stitch of each row. If you're going to be knitting, depending on which way you're going, you either slip it purlwise or you slip it knitwise. So you simply, so I'm going to show you again. So my stitches are on my needle. I simply take my right hand needle tip, put it in, and take it off.
So you still have the same amount of stitches on each row.
Still have the same amount of stitches. I have just simply moved the first stitch over to the right hand needle without doing anything to it. Okay. I haven't knit it, I haven't purled it, I haven't done anything. So I've just slipped the stitch. It's called a slip stitch. That's all I've done. And then you carry on with the rest of the row. And what that does, it creates a nicer, neater edge up the side of your fabric. Okay? But when we actually use this in a project, I'll show it again. Okay?
Okay.
So that was that. And I think that was, oh, wait a sec.
I actually have a question.
Oh, okay.
Somehow that reminded me of a question I have. So as I was stitching last night, and I had a fairly long finished thing, it started curling up on itself. Yeah. Is that normal? Because then it was getting like in the way as I was stitching, especially when I'm doing the purl stitch.
You're making a very skinny strip. So yeah, it's gonna curl. Okay. Now, stockinette curls a lot.
Okay.
Garter stitch shouldn't curl that much. Now, stockinette curls a lot, like a lot. And a lot of people don't like that edge. And so usually if they're doing a project that has a lot of stockinette, like that sweater, the sweater top that I showed, the gray one.
Yes.
Got the neckband. Well, that's called ribbing. Okay, so ribbing is a combination of knit and purl stitches, and it looks like a stretchy neckband, right? Like my sweater, which is machine made, you can see the fabric is different than the rest of the sweater. Well, that ribbing is like that so that the sweater doesn't curl up on itself. Not that it's going to curl up to your nose, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, good question. The next one isn't a question, but I thought it was a great comment, so I wanted to share it. This was Karen, and Karen has a wonderful YouTube channel. She's the Needlebug, and I know she's put out some Hardanger tutorials, so it's on my list to check those out today because I've had some questions on Hardanger, and I am by no stretch of any imagination an expert on Hardanger. So we're not going to be switching from knitting to Hardanger tutorials anytime soon. Okay, so her comment is, just a thought. Since you mentioned how people will find what works for them, you may want to mention there are different ways to hold your needles. So just like people tension their yarn differently, people also hold their needles differently. So she says, I hold mine between my thumb and forefinger, but instead of the needle lying on top of my thumb, as yours does, the end of my needle is under my thumb against the palm of my hand. Some may find that more comfortable. And I thought that was an excellent point because sometimes I do that as well. Oh, my yarn is all tangled here. So that what she's saying is instead of it being like this, I think it's like this. So when you're, I think that like underneath the palm more. And sometimes when there's a lot of knitting in this, like a lot of knitting under your hand as the project grows, you'll hold it differently dependent on where you are in the row, dependent on how much fabric is under your hand. So she's exactly right. If it doesn't feel comfortable in your hand, play around with it and see if there's a way that works for you. Just like, you know, before we started recording, we were talking about how you're tensioning your yarn in your right hand.
And now I have it differently.
Yeah. What?
I have it differently now. I had it out over.
You had it wrapped around twice. Yeah. Okay. So, but my comment to you was on how you've got your pinky finger tucked up underneath your ring finger. Because when I saw you doing your lesson video, to me, it looked like your hand was really tense and really cramped up, right?
Yes. Because
it's hard to see, you know, over video what that feels like. And you can see when I knit, my hand is a little more, it's a little more open, not much.
I do that?
But my fingers are a little more curled in, whereas yours are curled up underneath. So, but I asked Gerald and he said it was comfortable and he didn't feel like it was tense at all. And so I said, party on, Gerald.
Yeah.
So looks good.
My hands do get tired just because I've never knitted before. And, you know, as I think, you know, I have to build up those muscles.
Yeah.
That...
Also, when you start something new and you're really keen on it and you do it for a long time, that's usually,
yeah.
I don't even know what I did there. Do you know when I did that? I made that mistake where I wrapped the yarn around at the beginning of that last row. That was weird. Anyway, so I'm just going to slip those over. Good. Okay, so the last question that I had is in regards to the pattern for the dishcloth. So, and that was from Myra, and Myra wanted to know whether she'd missed it because I hadn't really mentioned where to get the pattern from yet. And she's absolutely right. So I've been working on something with my friends. My good friends, my besties here in London, Adrienne and Louise, Fibre Friends podcast. So just, I don't know, most people probably know about the podcast because we've mentioned it a few times, but in case you don't know.
I'll link it below.
Okay, thank you. Louise is a knitting teacher and designer. Adrienne is a yarn dyer. She's the one who dyes most of my yarn. And I'm a bag maker. So the three of us together host a knitting podcast. And so when Gerald and I started doing this, and we talked about the dishcloth pattern and the hat, I started talking to Louise because I knew that, I don't know, when I do things, I go big or go home. So in my mind, I am envisioning teaching Gerald how to knit a Fair Isle sweater that's steeked, which means you cut your knitting and you sew up the sides, you know, with beautiful color work and buttons. And
yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing by the end of the year.
Totally by the end of the year. So I envision teaching you how to do all that stuff and putting out a whole like series of tutorial videos and having Louise help with the designs and having Adrienne, I want to use all of her yarn. And so, you know, once I started thinking about that and I started talking about it with Louise and Adrienne, you know, the wheels start turning, right? And those girls are, we really are a great trio because we really work well together. And Adrienne is a fairly new knitter comparatively. She's been crafting forever, but she was a crocheter. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I enabled her. I convinced her. I said, you know, I just know you'd love knitting. You should give it a try. And she did, and she fell down the rabbit hole, and now she's a true blue blood knitter. And so I said to Louise, I said, okay, could you do up a really simple dishcloth pattern for me that I can, you know, provide to the people that are doing this tutorial? And, then I said, okay, well, you're also a knitting teacher, and I know you've taught how to do knits, how to make hats before. She teaches a sock class. She teaches, she teaches all the knit-alongs at my local yarn shop. She's a great instructor. She's a great pattern writer. Her work is pretty sweet.
And she has good taste because she likes yellow.
She loves yellow. She's Gerald's color twin, basically. So she has done up a dishcloth pattern for us. I have it here. It's ready to go. And so now I get to tell you how to find it. So basically, the knitting world has a website called Ravelry, and it's more than a website. It is like its own little entity. There are so many people on Ravelry. It's like Tinder for knitters, sort of.
But there's no app. That's what I don't get. Why isn't there like a mobile app?
It's only, you can only access it from your desktop.
Because, who does that?
It's a website, right? It's a website. It's a free website, Gerald. Stop your complaining. It's a free website. Do you know how much work went into doing that?
I know. I'm just teasing.
Yeah. So anyways, if they come out with an app, they should probably charge up the wazoo for it. It'd be worth it. Anyways, in a nutshell, it's called Ravelry. So Gerald, you're going to have to link all of this below. You need to sign up for a Ravelry account. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. Gerald has already done it. Once you're in Ravelry and you have your own account on Ravelry, then you're going to go to Louise's Ravelry store, okay? And in her store on Ravelry, it's kind of like Etsy for Ravelry, if that makes any sense. It's its own little store inside Ravelry, and all designers can have their own Ravelry store where they sell PDF patterns of their designs. So Louise has posted her super simple diamond dishcloth pattern, and it is a free pattern download. It's a free PDF download because I wanted you to see. I want to do this with my Fibre Friends. I want to use their knowledge, and they're my friends, and they're awesome, and they know their stuff. So I wanted them to help me teach you. So Louise has got the dishcloth pattern for free, and it's substantial. Not substantial as in, hard. It's detailed, okay? So we're going to go through this pattern together. We're going to start it at the end of next week. So if you can, in the next week, go and download the pattern. There's a place on Ravelry, once you have your own account, you can keep it in your Ravelry library. You don't have to print it out. I like to have my patterns printed because then I can mark them up. And this is one of those things that you're going to keep this in your library forever. You're not going to need another pattern to make dishcloths. It's a little different than cross stitch. There's a bunch of variations, but basically in a nutshell, this is just a basic dishcloth, and you can make a million of them from the same pattern. So then I have asked her also to create a basic hat pattern. Now, moving forward, the patterns that Louise designs for us are going to be paid patterns because they're a lot of work. They're a lot of work, and they're very detailed. Louise really puts a lot of care and effort into them. So they're going to be for sale on her Ravelry shop. The hat pattern's probably going to be around $5 Canadian, just so that you guys have an idea of what's to come. So she's going to do a hat pattern. She already has, because she teaches these classes, and that's another thing. I can't ask her to provide something for us for free when she is paid as a knitting teacher and knitting instructor. That's her job. So
well, it's unfair. Yeah.
So anyways, so that's why those patterns are going to be paid for. And just like our cross-stitch designers, we want them to keep designing patterns, so we pay for the patterns. It's the same thing with knitting. If you want knitting patterns, we pay for them. So it's like buying a ball of yarn. You buy a ball of yarn and a pattern. So there's going to be a hat pattern. There's going to be a sock pattern. There is going to be a cardigan pattern. Now it's going to be very simple. We're going to keep these simple, and we're going to do them all together as we go along. Now, the beauty about having Adrienne as part of our crew, she's looking at these patterns from a slightly different viewpoint than we are, because she's a newer knitter. And she's also, she's pretty smart at breaking things down. So she had a look, you know, Louise did up the pattern, and then she kind of used Adrienne as her tech editor. And Adrienne went through the pattern and said, okay, well, as a new knitter, I might not understand how you've phrased that. Or she wanted a little bit more information on, you know, you tell me to increase, but can you describe a description of how to do that increase? So even though I'm going to do a video tutorial on how to do the increase, so like I was saying in the Pearl video, people learn differently, right? Mm-hmm. You may see it, but someone else may see it, but they also need to read the words. So you're going to have the pattern, you're going to have the video tutorial, you're going to have both methods of ways to learn. So plans are in the works, and it's going to be awesome.
Yay.
Yay. So, and socks, I have been, actually, Louise is the one who taught me how to make socks. And I have been using the original pattern that came with my class that I took with her. And that's the only sock pattern that I use for basic socks. It has the heel tutorial right in the pattern. It also teaches you how to do the toe. It's got everything. It's worth every penny. So once you log on to Ravelry and you join up, you can download your dishcloth pattern, and then we'll go from there. So you'll notice that the picture of her dishcloth in her pattern, you can see it's different colors, right? Mm-hmm. That's just the yarn. It's just a variegated yarn. She didn't, you know, snip her yarn and start a new color for each one. So it's just like a variegated cotton floss, okay. Just like stitching. So, okay.
Awesome.
Any questions?
I don't have any questions, but if you are, I know whenever I first logged on to Ravelry, it was kind of confusing.
Yes.
So maybe you and I could do a video next week.
On Ravelry?
On Ravelry, because we can, I believe we can use this same program that we're using now to record, and I can switch mine around so it's showing what I'm doing on Ravelry,
oh, really?
And we can explore the website together.
That's a great idea. I didn't know you could do that.
I think. I will research this week and find out for us for sure, okay, but I'm pretty sure that will work. And then that way, if any of you are struggling with navigating the website, this would be a great way to explore with me, because I've only ever been on one so far. I haven't really explored. Other than that, I looked at some patterns that I already have in my wish list. And then we'll go from there. So
awesome. What's your username?
Have another office hours next week. I think mine is GingerGerald, because it wouldn't let me put GingerGerald Stitcher. It was too long.
Okay. Mine is carriefluter, which used to be my original Instagram name, because my nickname as a child was Carrie, and I'm a flute player. I know, right? Really original.
Well, yeah, it's because GingerGerald is so original.
A lot of people thought Fluter was my last name.
Sounds like the last name.
I know. All right.
So, okay, so I will link all those below as well, because I just like on Instagram or Etsy, you can follow and link up with other knitters on Ravelry. I do know that much.
Friend other knitters, you can. It's a pretty amazing place. There are free patterns all over the place. You can put in all of your information, so you can keep a record of your stash, what you've got. You can keep a record of your projects, pictures of your project. If there's something that you're making, let's say I want to make a shawl by a certain designer, I can look in Ravelry for everyone else who has ever knit that pattern, and I can see their version of it. I can see the yarn that they picked. I can see what it looks like in the different colors, different needle size. People will post if they had trouble with a certain section, how they worked around it. I mean, I wish there was something similar for cross stitchers. Now, I have heard a rumor that there is something in the pike. Is that the right expression? Coming down the pike.
coming down the pike. Yeah.
I have heard that there's something in the works, but I don't know what it is, but that's super exciting because Ravelry is amazing. It's really amazing. So
cool.
Enjoy.
Okay. Well, if you have any further questions, feel free to comment below or on one of the lesson videos on Caroline's website or on her channel, and we will be sure to. I think this might become not like a regular thing, but like it would be kind of cool just to have office hours.
I think it's a great way to check in. It's a really good way also for me to answer questions that people have asked me, because I know, you know, if one person has asked me a question, there's got to be at least 50 other people who are thinking and wondering the exact same thing. And no, I think that's really good. And hey, Gerald.
Yes.
You're a knitter.
I am a knitter.
Look at you.
Look at that. So, oh, I know what else I was going to talk about. So, as you can see, I came back to wooden needles, and because I was there for a while when I first started doing the knit stitch, I switched from wood back or over to my nickel plated or nickel needles, and but now I'm back to wood, and right now I'm liking wood better, and it's because as I'm getting faster, I don't know if maybe some of you have noticed this as well. As I'm getting faster, I'm on the nickel needles. Yeah, that's like a tongue twister there. On the metal needles, I was losing stitches off because I was going so fast they would just slip off before I had a chance to actually do the stitch, and then I would have to start over again because I couldn't fix it. So
the tension is getting looser.
It is getting looser, yeah. So I have switched back to the wood needles because there's just a tiny bit more friction on the needles, so that I don't really have that issue now.
You'll also find different fiber content in your wool will make a difference. Now, so that's a good point, actually. You'll notice that on Louise's pattern, she calls for a 4.5 needle. And I have suggested that everybody get a 5. It's fine.
That's a US 8, right?
US 8. So a US 7 is the 4.5 millimeter.
Okay.
You're going to find with the cotton yarn is very slidey. So if you have a metal needle, it's probably going to be a little bit slippery than if you're using wood.
So just be prepared. It's not you.
Just be prepared. It is going to be slippery. It's totally doable. But if it bothers you, you may want to switch to a wooden needle. If you find that the fabric you're producing, now Louise's comment here right on the pattern is really good. So she says, under gauge, not critical for this project, but I prefer knitting my dishcloths tight to prevent excessive stretching. And now that's what's going to happen because, of course, you know, when you get the cotton wet, it's going to stretch. And so the looser the gauge, the more the stretching. So as you use the dishcloth, it's going to open up quite a bit in the water. So using a 4.5 needle will create a smaller gauge, so a slightly tighter garter stitch. Okay. But really, it's not, there's no one answer. You're just going to have to kind of work your way through it and figure out what you like. I prefer metal needles to wood. I don't really like wood needles. I don't like knitting socks on wood needles, but my sister-in-law, Kathy, loves wood, and she prefers wooden needles. And I'm just not a fan, which is weird because I'm a really loose knitter, but I don't have a problem. And it's probably because I'm holding on to the stitches with my other hand. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay, so if you haven't yet subscribed to Caroline and you want to learn to knit with us, go check her channel out. Again, it's linked below. And we will have, when's our next lesson coming out?
Probably Wednesday. I'm going to teach the increase and the decrease that we're going to use for the washcloth. I'm going to do that on Wednesday. If you're just starting, if you're just joining us now, and it's never too late to join in, I've created a separate playlist of the knitting videos on my channel. So you don't have to hunt through the whole long list of other videos that I've put out. you can just go over to click over to the playlist section, and there's 2 playlists in there, and one of them, it's very obvious which one is the knitting.
And I also have a playlist on my homework videos from those lessons.
Because you're a good boy and you do your homework.
I do. I try. I procrastinate at times putting them up, but you know.
Good.
Okay. Well, thank
you for
you.
being such a good student.
And again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, hit us up here, Instagram. They're all the same. So.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Gerald. Bye.
Bye.